Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the QUADRISE investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time using the Q&A tab just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your questions at any time and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and we'll publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll, and I'm sure the company will be most grateful for your participation. I'd now like to hand over to Non-Executive Chairman Andy Morrison. Good morning.
Thanks, Mark, and hello everyone. Thanks for taking the time this morning. I'm here with Jason Mars, the Chief Executive, and we're here to talk about QUADRISE PLC. Particularly, we're here to talk about energy decarbonisation and specifically the sustainable marine fuels. We've all heard a lot about sustainable aviation fuels over the last few months and years, and now we think it's time for sustainable marine fuels to have the same kind of airtime, and we're going to be talking about that today. We changed our ticker last year, as some of you will know, to QED. For QED stands for energy decarbonisation, and I also had to look it up, as some of you may have actually said. Quod erat demonstrandum is what it stands for. We've all heard about it, and it means what was to be demonstrated. And we are here today to demonstrate that we've got a significant contribution to make, and to encourage you to support us, to continue to support us on our journey. And our strategy is to work with world-class partners such as MSC and Cargill. And we're now working on finalising the binding agreements for vessel trials ahead of commercialisation. Our milestones for this year include establishing the supply and logistics for those trials and getting into commercial revenues from MSC and in Morocco and Utah. And those of you who know us well will know that Utah has taken us much longer than we really intended or wanted. But we do still believe, and you'll hear when we talk about it a bit more later on, we do still think that is a prize that's worth going for low sulfur heavy fuel oils. Could you change the slide, please?
Sure.
We really hardly need to talk to this slide, although it's there. It's an important part of the presentation in the sense that for completeness, but it's a global imperative. We absolutely have to reduce the carbon footprint. And it's a huge opportunity, a global priority. It's never been clearer that shipping needs to reduce its carbon footprint. And we will show you today how our solutions are cleaner, cheaper, simpler, and safer, and above all, that can be deployed right now. And I'm going to hand over to Jason, who's going to take you through how we are going to deliver on our plans. And I'll be back with you later.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, and just to recap in terms of what we do as a company, the company was really formed on the basis of providing a lower cost version of fuel oil. Fuel oil is itself today a blend of heavy residual material, the bitumen, viscous material that comes off the bottom of the barrel, and that's thinned down with distillates in the refinery generally today to provide a fuel which can be used by the marine industry and other sectors. We make a cheaper version of that by just taking the residual matter and suspending that in water to produce an oil and water emulsion, which itself burns a lot better than conventional fuel oil, and it's extremely stable to use. So you can use it almost as a drop-in solution to heavy fuel oil. And then taking that technology one step further, a few years ago, as I'm sure many of you recall, we launched a product called BioMSAR, which itself is a mixture of biofuel today, which is renewable glycerin, supplied initially by Cargill, and then we're blending that with conventional hydrocarbons, residual material, or even heavy fuel oils to produce a biofuel, BioMSAR. So that's our first sort of renewable version of a product which provides today about 25% lower CO2, potentially higher if you get higher engine efficiency, which we aim to demonstrate. And then taking that concept one step further, we have a plan in place by 2030 to offer a completely sustainable B100 rather biofuel called BioMSAR Zero, which has basically zero hydrocarbon in it, and we're doing that by blending oil-based biofuels with water-based biofuels. And there's some work ongoing as part of that, which we'll tell you about a little bit later. Now, in terms of the solutions that we offer, they're designed to be cleaner, that they burn much better than conventional fuel. They burn more efficiently, so you get better engine, basically lower fuel consumption for the engine, which produces lower CO2. And then by introducing the biofuel components, you can increase that CO2 reduction capability as well. They burn, because they're water-based, at a much lower temperature, so you get lower emissions of NOx, visible smoke, and they're pretty cheap to implement. So basically, where our systems really win is we're basically using modular technology from the asphalt industry, which is low in capital cost. So that provides a pretty quick payback time. So each of our modules costs about $5 to $10 million to install in the refinery, and they're paid back in less than 12 months. They are very simple to install in the refinery. So that takes sort of 6 to 12 months, depending on the permitting is the leading factor there. And they're scalable. So each module provides about 350,000 tons a year of the biofuel. So they're pretty easy to implement, and each module can supply just over 10 container ships. And then we have a miniaturized version of that technology to go on board the ships as well. They're much safer to utilize. They're water-based, so they have a lower lower sort of hazard rating in terms of their utilization. They're less impactful for the crew in terms of you're operating at a much lower temperature, so there's less hazards for them to deal with. There's no gases like there would be to deal with in terms of LNG and ammonia, and they're stored and handled at very low, at ambient conditions, as opposed to having to heat up the products to high temperatures, because they're inherently low viscosity. They're oil and water emulsions. And then in terms of the people that we have to hand and the partners we're dealing with, as Andy mentioned before, we've got a very good, strong team of specialists. You see Bernard top left, one of our head of operations there. He's been involved with me in the emulsion fuel business for many years. And then we have a number of other energy and oil specialists, especially in terms of the board, a number of people with that Shell background. And we're partnering up with some very large companies. Neurion we've been working with, formerly AkzoNobel since inception, and then larger companies with MSC and now with Cargill, sort of roll for the rollout of the marine and the biofuel business. And then in terms of the background of the company, we have a very strong IP position as well, in terms of the original IP for MSAR, but also a growing number of patents now for the bio MSAR development, and more recently incorporating some of the biomass derived sugars, with a pipeline of other patents that we sort of plan to launch during the coming years. In terms of why people would look at the technology, initially, I guess looking at the refinery, the base application for MSAR, basically what happens in the refinery is by not having to blend distillates into the residual material, they can save that distillate for sale, and that really yields a value for the refinery, which provides an increased margin. By the same token, depending on the biofuel that you use, basically if you take a low-grade biofuel and you can incorporate it and sell it as a marine biofuel, there's a premium to be made there as well. So there's an increased margin whether you're supplying the residual material or the biofuel component, and that itself then provides the subsidy that's in place, that once you emulsify it, you can deliver a lower cost energy for the end user. If they're basically running the fuel in a diesel engine, then they get a lower fuel consumption, which saves them money. And overall, that increased margin pays for the saving, or basically there's a saving on the ship that basically incentivizes the user to take the fuel. To modify a vessel costs around sort of $500,000. So the MSC Leandra that we're going to be doing the trial on, that's got a new fuel booster unit in, which for the emulsion fuel that's run separately to the conventional fuel system. So it means you can easily switch between fuels. That costs about $500,000, so it's a very quick payback, as you can see, in terms of the saving per vessel for the larger vessels. And then in terms of how we make money, it's either via a licensing model where we supply the equipment, or on a tolling basis, which is what we plan to do with Cargill for the MSC trial, to give you an example. And the tolling model basically provides a higher sales and margin because we're providing the equipment ourselves, and then we're operating it as well. Obviously, we make a slightly higher margin than on the additional services provided. So what we're looking to do is based on this example, is scale this up to a level where we've certainly, members of the team have achieved this before, and to do that, obviously, we need to sort of get some of these projects on the road. Now, behind the scenes, in terms of what's helping the technology, there are obviously new regulations which are coming in to the sector to decarbonise the marine industry, and that's really being led by the European Union. Firstly, the ETS system, the emissions trading system or scheme in Europe, is basically setting a carbon price, and what it's done is it's drawn the maritime industry into that particular sector as well, to look at their tank to wake emissions and start to charge them based on a baseline value, based on for their emissions, that the incremental emissions that they're looking to basically generate in European waters. So what that means is an operator in Europe will have to basically declare their emissions of CO2 when it's in European waters, and they will have to have in 2024 they have to basically get allocations of 40% of those emissions, and then that scales up over the next 3 years. So that starts to cost people operating in Europe, cost them money. And then in parallel to that, there's another regulation called Fuel EU Maritime, which looks at well-to-wake emissions and is forcing ship owners to then start to cut their emissions of greenhouse gases as well. It's a reasonably light regulation compared to ETS, but then it starts to get inherently worse after 2030. And then the IMO in parallel are looking to basically bring in regulations as well, pretty much to mirror what's happening in the EU, or albeit a slight lag, but the IMO covers the global area, not just obviously European waters. And then what we're seeing outside of Europe is the US, some of the ports in the US now and places like Singapore are starting to look at implementing their own regulations as well, all of which means in the next decade that there's going to be a growth in the use of lower carbon fuels. And specifically in our category, we certainly see this is going to be a decade of really increased use of biofuels going forward. And there's a monetary, even though biofuels are more expensive today, to the tune of sort of 50 to 100% more expensive, depending on the biofuel you're using to blend. Basically, what that means is that there's an additional cost, but that's subsidised by the value of the CO2 reduction. So if you look at an example here where we've got one module supplying 11 large ships, container ships, if they supply with bio-MSAR, they're saving a fairly large amount of CO2 because of the 25 to 30% reduction in CO2 emissions that bio-MSAR offers. And that basically saves them money, other that they would otherwise have to spend on European Union ETS allocations. In this example, using sort of $90 a tonne. And the expectation is that it's a cap and trade system. So as the system develops, the availability, these allocations will become more limited, and that will start to drive the cost of compliance, and the cost of the value of CO2 will become more expensive going forward. So overall, what our plan is now is to scale up, the implementation of our systems around the larger bunker hubs. So we have a number of projects that we're ongoing that sort of fit into that mold. So obviously the large project that we have with MSC is around putting a system into the sort of ARA, so basically Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Amsterdam region and the Mediterranean. So in the ARA zone, we're focusing on Antwerp. And putting a facility in there with Cargill and with MAC2, and then in the Med we're looking at some of the refineries there that can supply our industrial clients in Morocco, but with a view then that there's additional fuel that could be made to supply the marine industry out of the Med. With the project we have in Utah with Valcor, initially we'll focus on local users for that facility, but the ultimate objective is to supply a lower carbon, lower sulfur fuel for the marine industry there, both in the form of MSAR and bio-MSAR. And then we have some what we call tier 2 projects, smaller projects that we're working on as well in Panama, which is with a power plant there that can utilize the fuel as an alternative to fuel oil. But with a view again, Panama is a pretty big bunker hub for the ships going through the Panama Canal. And then in Singapore, we have basically a southeastern a refinery that's very nearby that particular facility. Singapore is the world's largest bunker hub that's around today, supplying the most of the the marine fleet with large amounts of fuel oil, and more importantly now increasing amounts of biofuel. The biofuel business there is really taken off this year. So there's an increasing amount of biofuel supplied out of Singapore. So we're dealing with a refinery that's fairly near a very large terminal that could offer supply to that particular hub as well. Now, in terms of where we are with our particular projects, we are looking to try and get to close out the various agreements by the end of this month. Obviously, that doesn't leave us many days to do that, but that's certainly what we're looking to achieve. These are binding agreements. There's a three-way agreement between ourselves, MSC, and Cargill, and then various other bilateral agreements with regards to fuel supply, tolling, and also a services agreement with the terminal as well. So, yeah, the current phase is literally with the lawyers sort of bouncing backwards and forwards at the moment to try and finalise these agreements to get going, and then in Q2 that allows us to deploy our facility to site. The permit approval is expected basically during the next month or so. So that's MAC 2 actually pre-submitted that application before towards the end of 2023 to try and advance that process. So that won't delay us. And then the plan is sort of the beginning of the sort of the middle of the year. We're looking to then start delivering fuel to the MSC Leandra 5, which is now ready to take the fuel. We'll be deployed to obviously visit Antwerp on a regular basis, and then we commence with a proof of concept trial with MSAR prior to then doing the first proof of concept then with BioMSAR, so we can look at the two versions of the fuel back to back. The vessel has previously used MSAR before, but has been modified slightly, so it'd be interesting to see how MSAR performs again on that vessel, and then for the first time basically the use of BioMSAR on a two-stroke engine, which we're extremely excited about. And then assuming all goes well with a proof of concept with BioMSAR, which we fully expect, then there'll be an operational trial much as it was before when we supplied the Maersk vessel over a period of sort of 6 to 8 months. So that's the plan for the letter for that particular trial. Obviously, towards the end of that particular trial, we'll be looking at commercial supply, and then there's an opportunity also to get at the midpoint to get an interim loano as well, which should advance commercial discussions if assuming all goes well. And then after that, then there's a wider commercial supply from that facility, as it alluded to in the previous slides. One MSAR unit can supply up to 11 vessels, so we're looking to obviously maximise the output of that particular facility from Antwerp. In parallel to what we're doing with MSC, there's obviously some work going on also on the net zero product, the BioMSAR Zero product, where we're looking at alternatives for glycerin to supplement the use of, if there's a limitation in the future with glycerin, we need to have some alternatives there. So we're looking at sugars that are derived from biomass, both sort of conventional sugars, and also looking at sort of pyrolytic sugars as well that come from the pyrolysis process. And then we're also looking at methyl ester type products, which can come through the production of sort of fatty acids and biodiesel. So what we can do is combine those products together to produce a product which has a completely is a hydrocarbon free, fully bio-based and from sustainable sources. So with taking that from the lab situation through to a stationary engine test during the next 6 months, obviously contingent on how much funds we have to play with at that time. And then the blend on board process as well, that technology, we have a blend on board unit that we're looking to deploy on a vessel with a partner there. That could be MSC or it could be others. So we're looking at deploying that particular facility, which we're also using for blending applications on some of the other trials. So that unit is fully deployed. And then looking at the other projects that we have, Andy mentioned Valcor before. Obviously, it's taken a little bit of time for them to get to the point of drilling. We expect their drilling permits will be awarded pretty soon, and that will allow them to start drilling in the second quarter of the year, is our expectation. That will generate samples that we can further test further at QRF once they've processed them through their technology that they're looking to deploy. And that drilling program will also enhance their ability to raise project finance as well, at least for the projects that are looking at the downhole application. Although they do have other projects which are also looking at oil sands, as conventional oil sands as well. So once Valcor receive the project finance of 15 million, then that triggers then the payment to us of for the site license agreement, which we've already signed with them, which gives us income of $1 million, with another $500,000 then of income once we supply the equipment to site. And then that provides then obviously the ability to supply fuel for trials. The oil will be flowing at that stage, and we'll have the capability then of providing sort of trial quantities to local users, be they power stations or be they sort of local users of sort of fuel for diesel engines. And then in Morocco, where we concluded the trial at the end of last year, finally, the client, we submitted a report to the client, which they were happy with. And now we're looking at finalising the agreements, putting the agreements in place to provide commercial supply to that particular customer, and in parallel conclude terms for sort of paid trials with some of their other sites as well. So the client will pay for the site trials that we were looking to run on their facilities there. And then towards the end of the year, the second half of the year anyway, we'll be in the preparation mode to get everything installed in a refinery, conclude any other trials that are needed nearby, and then look at commercial supply in a year's time. And then in Southeast Asia, the refinery there, we're looking to conclude terms there to do a trial. That trial itself, if it's successful, can then morph into commercial supply. So that system is designed then to be able to run on a commercial basis in the refinery to supply fuel for the refinery, for the refinery furnaces and thermal applications there. And then in parallel in Central America, we have a power station that's looking to trial basically the trial MSAR as an alternative to fuel oil, and we'll do that by blending on site using our sort of 5 tonne an hour unit, and we're basically then looking at then commercial supply from Panama as well, from one of the refineries there into the Panama location. So that's the plan on those other projects. So yeah, all in all, there's a lot to do, and that means that we need to make sure that we're fully funded to do that. So the shareholders would have seen that we've recently placed £1.5 million with placees, essentially to provide us with funding for the best part of 12 months now. Primarily, the money is going to the progression of the MSC project, where we're obviously looking to commence that particular trial. We need to buy equipment to do that and install that equipment on site and operate the facility. So that will provide us, the funds will predominantly give us money to progress that particular trial. There's a credit, obviously, if money comes in from Utah, which we fully expect, which will offset the costs of carrying out supplying that unit to site, and also the costs of completing the Morocco supply as well. And then there's a sort of a net cost also of the BioMSAR and sort of BioMSAR Zero development program as well, that we look to continue doing in parallel. So as part of that placing, myself and other directors obviously were part of that particular placing. A few people coming in on the open offer as well. And then in terms of the open offer funds, which we're now looking to raise from the existing shareholders, that's really primarily to look at the acceleration of the BioMSAR business. Obviously, the plan is the target was originally to launch this in 2030, but we can see that there's a definite incentive for us to try and launch that a lot earlier. So we'd like the funds to do that if we can. The projects in Central America and Southeast Asia, I mentioned before, are tier 2. So the additional funds, some of the additional funds will help us to complete those projects. And then there's some contingency to make sure we can get to the point of profitability as well. So overall, the timetable is obviously the open offer has been launched. The placing shares will be emitted today for the 1.5 million. placing, and then the results of the open offer are expected sometime after Easter. So that's the current plan, the timetable in terms of what we're doing rather. So I'll hand back to Andy so he can conclude.
Thanks, Jason. Before we sort of open up to questions and answers, just want to sort of summarise a couple of slides. The decarbonisation of shipping is a massive opportunity and a huge task as well. We're working with world-class partners who we believe can make it happen. And I think it's also worth bearing in mind that the team that has been involved in this business for a long time has taken the business like this to scale before. So I think we have what it takes to get this business to scale. In 2024 is really about establishing production and revenues. And our new technology work that Jason explained is continuing, I was going to say in the background, but actually it's quite an active program. We're getting closer and closer to the net zero biofuel, and really the blend on board technology is really just waiting for customer deployment. And the customers obviously need to see the low-no in many cases before they will deploy, but it's really it's ready for the deployment. And we will continue our outreach to strategic partners who can help us scale the business. I think the way we look at it is that 2024 is really a year for delivering on our milestones and getting value for shareholders, existing shareholders who put money in, and we want to make sure that is recognised by the progress that we can make. And so strategic partners, although we'll continue to reach out to them, and who knows how fast those conversations would go, but we really see that as a 2025 task when we pass some milestones, we've got some value in the tank, and then we may be able to do some transactions, some deals to help us accelerate that process. Just to move on one more, please, Jason.
Sure.
And then finally, in summary, I think our purpose has never been clearer. I think we've very much focused on the shipping today, and we've probably never been quite as clear as that in the past, but we really do see that as where our purpose is. And our solutions, I think, have never been more needed and more relevant. And our focus, I think, has never been sharper. And I think shareholders hardly need reminding that our time is now. We really need to get on with this. No point coming back in 10 years' time with a solution. We need to get on with this. And so we believe that our plans with the money that we've secured and that we're still seeking through the open offer will provide multiple value catalysts, and we'd love to have you continue supporting us on the journey. And so with that, that's the end of the presentation section. I'll hand back to Mark, for the next phase.
That's really kind of you, Andy. Thank you. And Jason, thank you for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just using the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen. But just while the guys take a couple of moments to review your questions submitted already, I'd just like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, a copy of the slides and the published Q&A can be accessed via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. Andy, you've received a number of questions throughout the presentation today, and a number that were pre-submitted, so thank you to everybody for your engagement. And if I may just hand back to you just to moderate through that Q&A, and I'll pick up from you at the end.
Thanks again, Mark. And just we are in an open offer period, so we do have to be a little bit careful about making sure we stick to the script, if you like, on answers, and we'll do our best to answer questions pre-submitted and also on the day. But if we don't get to a question or we can't answer it immediately, then please bear with us. We will come back with some published answers on those other questions later on. And so with that, then I'd like to start off with some of the questions that we've received. And Jason's going to answer most of these, I think, but I might answer the odd one as well. But anyway, the first one: do you think it's possible to have a version of BioMSR Zero ready for the market by year end, and will it need its own low-no?
A good question. I mean, where we are at the moment is we have a prototype that's in the lab that still needs to go through quite a bit of testing at the moment, and depending on the nature of the final formulation. will determine whether it needs a lono or not, right? So we haven't yet got a lono for our basic BioMSAR product, so we need to make sure that we make some progress with that, and then depending on the components we're using to then blend to make the BioMSAR Zero product, that will determine whether there's a substantial difference or not. So, for instance, if we're using quite a lot of glycerin and combining that with another fuel that's known to the marine industry, for instance, like a methyl ester, then we may be able to sort of shortcut the lono process. But that's really depends on a lot more steps in terms of what we end up with in terms of the final formulation, how we do with the BioMSAR trials. And then ultimately the discussions then with the engine manufacturer, depending on their level of confidence at the time. Obviously, some are further up the curve than others at that point as well. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done to finally launch that. But I would say that with the original goal of 2030, we're several years ahead now of that particular development activity. But as ultimately this costs money to do as well. So it depends a little bit on the funds available to progress that in amongst the core projects, which is the primary focus is to get to commercial revenue.
Okay, and around the interim results, it says the company continues to assess strategic options and partnerships to accelerate commercialization of both BioMSAR and MSAR within the shipping sector. Can you advise if you are looking at strategic investment into QUADRISE or just into facilitating production and distribution and bunkering, for example? And so maybe I could take this one. And I think that it really, I kind of actually answered it towards the end of the presentation. We are looking at both options. Our focus today is more on the operational partnerships and options to make sure that we get the trials finished and into revenues. And I think our agreements with Cargill and MAC2 are examples of this to meet the growing requirements for biofuels in Northwest Europe. And so just to repeat briefly what I said, I think the way we see it is that we need to use this current year, 2024, to pass some really important milestones, and then we can come back to bigger deals, perhaps to address the scaling up of the business. Maybe we can do those in 2025. So that's why I would answer that. As BioMSAR has been tested in a diesel engine with excellent emissions reduction results, have QUADRISE looked at the potential for trials in vehicles such as freight trucks, delivery vans, construction, mining vehicles, etc., where maybe on success a major oil company could then license the technology and do the distribution through its existing regional and global network? Diesel vehicles will still be in use for a few decades, and BioMSAR and MSAR Zero could help a lot in cutting emissions from the sector. Jason, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, today our focus really has been on the larger energy, the larger engines. So we're looking at sort of the marine, the engines, diesel engines, which are used for the marine, power, and industrial sectors. Although we have been testing on essentially what looks like a truck engine. So the fact that the fuel works for brief tests on a diesel engine shows some promise that it could be used in the automotive sector in the future. I guess the reality is that the automotive sector is also highly regulated and utilizes pretty clean hydrocarbon fuels and a very small amount of biofuel today. Okay, so there's quite a lot of resistance in the automotive sector to bump up the use of biofuels beyond set levels. So they're looking at renewable diesel and other products. So for BioMSAR, for that particular market, I would say it's further out in terms of our development pipeline than, for instance, the diesel engines, which might be used in a marine. So you mentioned a mining application in the question. There are quite a few stationary diesel engines which are used for power generation in mines, etc., in remote locations. So they would be our choice first, rather than actually powering the vehicles that then operate around the mine. Just because those vehicles are a lot harder to convert, and they need a lot cleaner hydrocarbon in the first place to actually be used in the engine and be sort of warranted by all the manufacturers, etc.
Okay, thanks. Another question here about timeframes. Why are our counterparty lawyers taking so long to finalise the outstanding agreements?
Yeah, I mean, in all cases, we're working with some very large multinational companies, and their lawyers are involved in multiple projects, some of which are multi-billion-dollar deals, and are sort of time critical as world events may dictate as well. So ultimately, our agreements get put into a pipeline, and we have to wait our turn. The sign-off process is done at a very senior level. So again, to make sure that everybody has the documentation they need to get that signed off. So unfortunately, it does take a little bit longer to get these agreements signed off than we would wish. We can obviously turn things around quickly at our end, but that doesn't mean that we can suddenly push our counterparties to act at the same pace if they've got other things that they're dealing with in parallel.
Yeah, okay. And this is a rather long question, but and you have actually answered part of it already in the presentation, Jason. Naturally, you regularly like to talk about the advantages of your fuels compared to other fuels. This can give the impression that there is no rational reason why a fuel purchaser would buy any other fuel than one of your fuels. Is this really true? Please give an open and clear comparison of what the relative advantages and disadvantages of your fuels, ideally including Biomsar Zero, compared to other fuels, especially biofuels, which are either presently available under development, as they are comparable in that they also have no need for expensive ship modifications. This needs to address cost reduction of each type of emission and any other factors a fuel buyer is likely to consider. What can you say about that, Jason?
It's a very long question and very difficult to answer completely, probably on a call like this. But the reality is that the fundamental, I guess, value driver for our biofuel is that it's cheaper. Okay, so it's designed to be 10% cheaper than the alternative biofuels today. So we compare our BioMSAR product with something called B30 today. They're quite similar in terms of the CO2 reduction, and B30 uses 30% of a fatty acid methyl ester or a yeast cooking oil derivation of a methyl ester. So basically, our blend of glycerin combined with heavy fuel oil or residuals is at least 10% cheaper for the end user, such as MSC, to use. So that's the fundamental basis behind why people at MSC are interested. Now, it's a case-by-case example, and what we do, what we've done today is, beyond BioMSAR, there's also beyond B30, there are other fuels we're competing against as well, such as LNG. So what we've tried to do for shareholders is to try and provide a simple breakdown and sort of understanding of how our fuels compare. In terms of the economics, we probably need to provide a little bit of a better summary so shareholders can understand that. Obviously, in terms of our dealings with clients such as with Cargill and MSC, we're under full non-disclosure, and there's a lot more detailed analysis that can go into that as well. So, but we are aware that we do need to provide a better breakdown so shareholders can understand what we're dealing with, and we're not trying to present the fact that we're the only game in town. There's a lot of biofuel that's already being used by the marine sector. All we're doing is we're providing a lower cost version of that biofuel today. So that's really our competition. But there are other biofuels that are being utilised today in the industry, which obviously provides a good pathway for us to provide a lower cost, lower emission solution.
Thanks, Jason. And there's another question about timings, which is we can't really say much more than we've made publicly available. But given that we are at the very end of Q1, how far into Q3 is the proof of concept and low-no trial expected to start on the Leandra?
Yeah, I mean, provided we can get the agreement signed off, ideally by the end of this month, which is still the plan, and that early Q3 is we still have scheduled for delivery to the Leandra. Obviously, every week sort of delays us a week potentially to get started. So we're looking at, we're making sure that we have the agreements in place first of all, and we have a very detailed program with the guys in the office at the moment. They're basically working on to make sure we can deliver everything on time. We're starting to buy already long lead equipment. So we've already made commitment to buying some of that equipment today if it threatens the delivery of the trial. So at the moment, we're confident that early Q3 we can start delivering fuel to the Leandra 5.
Thanks. And moving to Central America, where do you expect to get suitable feedstock for the trial and potential commercial side to the Sparkle Power assets? Is Cargill expected to be involved?
In terms of Sparkle Power, the main interest for them is a lower cost alternative to fuel oil. So Cargill are not in the fuel oil supply business. Their main interest is in biofuels, frankly, and which is why they're involved in the MSC project. In terms of supply to Sparkle going forward, that will be from one of the larger refineries that could supply that particular area with high sulfur fuel oil today. So we have agents in place down in South and Central America who are working on that project. But the first thing is to actually get the trial done at the site as well.
Okay, I'll take the next couple of questions together. Any update on the JGC refinery refueling or the Asian refinery project?
In terms of JGC refinery, there's no update to report really on at this time. We haven't done a lot of work in Japan. Our focus has really been on the core projects which we reported on today, which obviously one of which is the Asian refinery project, where we're looking to obviously conclude the proposal for the trial and the commercial agreement, upon success, such that trial can then roll into a sort of commercial supply operation once complete. So we're looking to conclude that agreement sort of during the coming period, which is subject to some of the other things we're working on in parallel.
Okay, next question is one probably for me. Have you tried to get one of the big oil companies to invest in QUADRISE to improve their green credentials and to improve QUADRISE finances and share price? And I think this is a kind of a variation on the strategic partner question, and so the answer to that is simple. I think the point I could add here is that we see our agreement with Cargill and for the MSC trials is an important step in that direction. Okay, they're not an oil major, but they're certainly a major organisation and actually in some ways more relevant to what we're doing. And it may be possible to do more with Cargill in the future once the trials are complete. Who knows? But it's really just the strategic. Big strategic deals come when we've achieved some milestones. I think is the important thing that shareholders should take away from that. Is this likely to be the last time the company needs to fundraise before commercial deals commence and revenue is generated? Back to you, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly believe that's the case. We're working on the basis that the projects as finance, for the projects as forecast, and the expenditure that we've got in place will provide us with the funding that we need to up to the end of March next year. By which time we expect that Morocco and Utah to be revenue generating, and the MSC trial, which will also generate a small amount of trial revenue, will be sort of nearing completion as well. Obviously, if the open offer is fully subscribed, then the additional proceeds that we raise will allow us to accelerate the BioMSAR development process as well, and sort of progress the projects in Central America and Southeast Asia, the latter certainly being revenue generated within the same period. So that should provide sort of a clearer pathway to sort of profitability as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Now moving on to Utah. Relating to the Utah project, are there any plans to provide biofuel feedstock to the project site to create BioMSAR from the project's hydrocarbon source? Also, are Cargill aware of this project, and is there scope or interest for Cargill to become involved as a partner to improve scaling up potential?
Yeah, so the plan, I guess, for at least the drilling project is that the plan, in the future they're looking to do CO2 sequestration. So the idea is that it'll have a carbon neutral product as it gets to ground level, and also the properties of the oil are such that it doesn't, if it doesn't go through the refining process, it's ultimately very low sulfur in the treatment process they plan to use on site. So we've got basically a very heavy fuel oil alternative, which is low sulfur, which can go to the marine industry. So that itself will be sort of, we don't necessarily need to add biofuel to that to get a sort of 15 to 20% saving. But ultimately, if the marine industry is using sort of a B30 product, then we will add some biofuel to that as well to produce a BioMSAR, and we will need biofuel feedstocks for that, obviously, and that's something we will take up with Cargill at the time. I mean, the main focus for Cargill at the moment is in Europe for the MSc trial, but they're certainly aware of the other projects we're working on as well that may need their feedstocks in the future.
Okay, and then there's one here I can probably answer. Are there any additional or new projects you can update us on? Because I think actually Jason's touched on this several times, and there aren't. It's the short answer to that. All our projects are updated via RNS or put out there. So what we've got in the circular and everything is really what we've got. And I think that from the point of view of having looking at our resources, we really do need to focus on what we have in front of us. It's already quite a long list of projects, and we've already, it's not through our own efforts, but shareholders well know that our projects have suffered delays, so we really don't want to add any further distraction to that. If anything, we need to focus on the few projects that we've got to get them over the line. So that's what we're focusing on. But back to you now with this one, Jason. Can you give any detail as to the blend on board aspect? When can we expect detail on this in relation to the agreement with MSC or trials with Cargill?
Yeah, so I mean, the blend on board aspect involves the installation of a smaller scale MMU. We actually own one of those already, so that MMU itself can be used for smaller scale trials, or it can be used for a blend on board application with the vessel owner. So we sort of apply that in a number of ways. The marine sort of the MSC Cargill project at the moment is fully focused on delivering a marine biofuel. So that itself is that we'll be bunkering the fuel as is, but there is obviously an interest in deploying this technology for as a blend on board solution as well, and that's something that we will take up with MSC and with Cargill once we get underway with the trials that are planned in Q3. There's a question also I think that came in while we were talking, Andy, in terms of could the blending equipment be fitted in tankers, so blending occurs while oil is in transit, before saving time in the process, and would any surplus ship electricity currently be a detrimental effect? And I guess I could add to that, would the addition of water be a problem as well? I mean, basically, we've looked at this into this technology in a lot of detail. Yes, it could be installed in tankers or indeed in bunker tankers as well, to do the blending on board the bunker vessel itself. So it can be done in transit on a vessel, because these types of tankers have multiple tanks, so it can be done. The electricity requirement is pretty low in the grand scheme of most of these vessels, so the actual consumption is a pretty low number. And then in terms of the availability of water, that depends a bit on how it's deployed, but a lot of the vessels that we're looking at have their own water system, so they may need a top up in terms of a reverse osmosis unit or something to provide the additional water. But it's definitely a feasible solution, especially if we get the efficiency savings that we expect to see during the Leander trial.
Okay, thanks. And if you see other questions that you particularly want to sort of prioritise, Jason, please do address those. But moving on here, providing the LONO is successful and the commercial supply agreement is reached with MSC, what is the strategy to roll out bio-MSAR and MSAR to other major bunker hubs? Are we reliant on local end users such as Sparkle Power and the Asian refinery, or will agreement with MSC provide sufficient demand outside of the ARA area to develop supply in other major hubs?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the core plan, obviously initially ARA is the main focus, supplying out of Antwerp, and then with the Morocco supply that we need, and essentially we'll need a system down in the Mediterranean region as well. So they're our first focus, and then in parallel to that, we've obviously got the Utah project where we'll have an MSAR unit deployed out there, where eventually we'll be looking to use that unit or more units to supply the ports of Los Angeles and also of Houston, US Gulf Coast region. So they're our main focus, and then for Panama, in terms of Panama, then and in terms of Southeast Asia, they're sort of support projects to that as well, where we'll have an MMU in place in each of those in the future ultimately. but they're probably at least a year out in terms of those applications for the bunker industry. At least the main focus for those projects is really to supply the end users there.
Yeah, no, I think I might add that the ships that we're looking to supply are some of the biggest ships in the world with the biggest engines. So we can, by having like a handful or a large handful of supply points, actually we can address quite a large proportion of the total market. So it's not an endless task, in fact, trying to get the logistics there. It's a big task for us to do. But if you've got 6 or 10 places, then you've got a really good network for these kinds of vessels. Given the most recent update, is the intent still to enter commercial supply discussion with MSC at the Lono interim stage? In addition, will shareholders be informed that commercial discussions have started?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, we'll see how things go. But depending on the results of the Lono sort of during vessel operations, we think it should be possible to advance commercial discussions to start after we've received an interim Lono from the engine manufacturer. So that's still the plan. I mean, ultimately, to be cautious, we can certainly say that commercial agreements will be concluded on the trial completion. But ultimately, if things work as we expect, then normally the midway point is at the time when we expect those commercial discussions to advance, so that everyone's ready at the end of that period to then sort of start ramping up supply. Because we definitely think demand's there, certainly in Europe as well.
Okay, and just move on to a question 80 because it's kind of related. After the marine proof of concept on MSAR, what's the plan for MSAR use within the MSC fleet, or are we still dependent on bio-MSAR Lono for MSAR rollout?
I think that's a subject for discussion once MSC have completed the MSAR proof of concept and that we've analysed the performance data on the MSC Leandra. Obviously, we'll have a lot more information now, on that particular vessel that MSC will have to hand to evaluate that discussion. But that particular vessel has been modified since the prior test on MSAR, so it's important to get that performance data, and that will obviously then influence MSC's decision in terms of progressing with MSAR. And we need to have supply locations set up for supply of conventional MSAR as well, which is obviously where refinery applications are important, such as the ones we're looking at for MSAR out of the Med as an example.
Yeah, I'm going to move on to question 20 on our list because it's about Morocco. We haven't had one yet about Morocco. As the Morocco project is only a small demand project, do we really have confidence we can access commercially economic feedstocks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of the overall application for that particular client, ultimately that could fill 1 MMU on its own. So that's certainly an attractive project as far as we're concerned, and we certainly believe that should be attractive to a refiner, as an example. So, but beyond Morocco, there's also then the possibility of supplying, as you mentioned before, potentially people like MSC with a conventional MSAR, but also the opportunity to then supply a biofuel with that same system is attractive for refineries. Most refineries today are looking at sort of greening up the refinery, producing more and more biofuels, and really that capability is extremely important. If we came to a refinery client with just an MSAR project on its own, that's less attractive than something that's got a pipeline and an opportunity to supply an increasing amount of biofuels.
Okay, thanks. And then going back to MSC, where a lot of questions are around MSC, what is the level of direct MSC board, i.e. chairman or CEO sponsorship, to go ahead with the trial and the subsequent commercial supply? Have you been talking to them, or is your main interaction with MSC ship management? I try to understand why signing the trial agreement takes much longer than initially anticipated.
Is that one for me or you, Andy? You can probably you're involved in both discussions.
Well, fine. So the relationship is the primary relationship is with the MSC ship management, where we deal with the CEO. You've heard the name Prabhat Jha, people before there. but the whole group is fully aware of that, including obviously the supply people who do the contracting of the fuel, and the parent company of the whole organisation, who are very keen to see this come to fruition. And I think the MSC have put a lot of weight into their strategy of putting scrubbers on ships and using high sulfur fuel oil, and our fuel is actually a very integral part of that whole process. So they're as keen as we are to see this thing done. That doesn't mean to say that they can push their lawyers any faster than we can, it seems, but nevertheless, they're very keen to see that through. And we've been in meetings with them face to face, where it's clear that if they see this trial succeed, then that they want to roll it out. And I think the more that they are anxious to see the success, then the more we sort of get that feeling of the pressure from them as well, which is good. It's we're all facing in the same direction for that. So this is somewhat related, but I think it's an important question to try to answer. 2 years ago at the Interims update, the following is published re MSC. Trial preparations are expected to commence in Q2 2022, with the trials themselves commencing before the end of calendar year 2022. What level of confidence do you have that MSC trial will now happen on your revised timetable, remembering that we've had numerous new timelines over the last 2 years and all have been missed? What can we say about that, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I guess since we first initiated discussions with MSC, the nature of the trial has changed a little bit. Originally, it was due to be an MSAR trial, and then MSC were very keen to incorporate bio-MSAR into that vessel trial development program as well. So we had to do a lot of work in 2022 actually with Wärtsilä to make sure that they were happy that the fuel could be utilised on the vessel, and they would warrant that they could go straight to a vessel test and not a stationary engine test. So that certainly delayed matters. In parallel, MSC were trying to work out which vessel they were looking to do the trial on, and in the end they purchased actually the Seago Istanbul, which fortunately had the MSAR fuel system that was still there, which had to do a little bit of refurbishment. But yeah, so that delayed us a little bit. And then I guess more recently, it's been finding the right biofuel supplier that can take us, can take this project forward, that can supply the sort of volumes that MSC would need, and also, believe it or not, finding a terminal facility that can host a trial as well. It's not, a lot of the terminals are sort of fully occupied, especially in the Arrow zone. So finding the right terminal with the right capability and I guess the vision to expand is extremely important as well. So that has taken a little bit of time to pull all those loose ends together. We're certainly now at the point where we have to get this trial away by the middle of the year. That's certainly an incentive for everybody to get that done. I think everybody agrees that the counterparties internally have all agreed that this is something that there's no time like the present now to get this biofuel up and running and tested. So everybody's focused on achieving that, but as Andy mentioned before, we still have to get through the lawyers to get this signed off.
Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our time now. We've answered some of the questions from today and most of the questions that were pre-submitted. Jason, just before we hand back to close, are there any of the questions that have been submitted today, any of the other questions that we haven't answered already? Are there any that you want to just conclude by answering?
There's a couple around, does the Leandra require dry docking for the trial? It sounds like the required pre-trial work has been completed. Yeah, if the vessel goes into dry docking, it's not for the reasons. It's nothing to do with the trial itself. It's for another application that MSC may be looking to trial on that particular vessel. So, that is really up to MSC to decide. The original thinking was that the dry docking would have happened by now, but that appears to have been postponed. So we don't see that the dry docking will take place before the trial happens, but that's really up to MSC to implement and not ourselves. At the moment, we've been told that the vessel is ready for Q3, and we need to get everything in place to make that happen.
Thanks, Jason. So we're going to draw to a close. Just as a sort of summarise from my side as well. I think we've tried to make it clear that our purpose is really clear around the shipping, and we hope you like that story and the greater focus that we've given to the shipping side of it today, and also the fact that the BioMSR 0 is within reach, and so we've got a lot to be working on, and we know very, very much from the questions and from our own experience within the company that the successive delays that shareholders have experienced has been at times demoralising. But I think we are very much within touching distance now, and as I say, I hope you like the story. Thanks very much for taking the time, and we will answer other questions that we haven't managed to get to and publish those answers. And just remains for me to thank you all for attending today, and I'll just hand back to Mark for any closing remarks.
That's great, Andy. Jason, thank you once again for updating investors. Please could I ask investors not to close this session, as we'll now automatically redirect you for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that Andy and Jason can really understand your views and expectations. This may take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of QUADRISE PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good afternoon to you all.